Welcome to the deep dive. We've got a huge pile of sources here, all focused on a really critical question. How do you build genuine stability in your life? Especially when you're planning for the long haul.
Yeah, it's about more than just finding a nice view, isn't it?
Definitely. We're talking about anchoring your life with solid financial security and a community structure that actually works.
That's right. When you're thinking about big shifts like retirement or just looking ahead a few decades, deciding where to put down roots, what comes down to your health, your happiness, and definitely your finances.
Mm.
And these sources, they really cut through the glossy pictures. They force us to look hard at the foundations.
What are those foundations exactly?
Things like financial resilience, the way our housing is actually structured, historically even, and how well those critical social systems operate. Or sometimes how they don't.
Okay, so that's our mission for this deep dive. We're going to unpack all that. We'll get into long-term investment strategies, tax advantages for, building wealth.
Generational wealth, potentially.
Right. And then we'll pivot to something maybe less obvious. The history behind how American communities got designed, physically, socially, sometimes deliberately to keep people out.
It's a crucial piece often overlooked.
And finally, we'll tackle the sort of day-to-day realities. Managing assets, dealing with public services. We're really analyzing what underpins genuine long-term stability. All right, let's dive straight into the money part, the financial bedrock.
Makes sense. It's fundamental.
So when you look at holding onto investments for a long time, say 25 years or more, the historical data seems pretty overwhelming.
What does it show?
Well, common stocks, they're highly likely to give you better total returns than things like guaranteed savings accounts or even safer bonds.
Okay, that's a big statement, especially for someone planning, say, a long retirement where security feels paramount.
It is, and when you look at the numbers, like from 1926 all the way to 2018, nearly a century, stocks just blew past long-term bonds and treasury bills in terms of total annual returns.
And what's really important there, I think, is the concept of real rates of return.
Explain that for us. What's a real return?
It's the growth you get after you account for inflation. Inflation eats away at your purchasing power. So if your investment grows 5%, but inflation is 3%, your nominal return is 5%, but your real return, your actual increase in buying power, is only 2%.
Gotcha. So stocks tend to beat inflation over the long run.
Historically, yes, that's been the case. They typically deliver positive real rates of return. If you're not beating inflation, you're actually losing ground financially, even if the number on your statement looks positive.
But there's always a but, isn't there? The trade-off for those higher potential returns is volatility. Big swings.
Huge swings. The data shows equity returns have gone from, gains over 50% in a single year to massive drops. Real stomach-churning stuff.
There's a specific period the sources highlight, 1968 to 1982. 14 years. What happened then?
Yeah, that was a surprisingly tough stretch for stocks. Returns were quite low, only about 5.5% per year on average.
Why so low over such a long period?
Well, it's interesting. The sources point out that dividend yields actually went up significantly then.
Which sounds good, right? More income.
You'd think so. But it actually signaled a drop in growth expectations. That increase in yield pulled the average annual return down by about 3.5 percentage points. It's a bit counterintuitive.
Okay, that's a lesson in market mechanics. And then there's the more recent example, the lost decade, the 2000s.
Oh, yeah, a classic case study in volatility, just crushing short-term results. Remember the dot-com bubble peak in 2000?
Vividly, valuations were through the roof.
Exactly. The S&P 500's dividend yield was tiny, just 1.2%. And the key metric, the price-earnings multiple, or PE ratio, it was over 30.
What does a PE over 30 actually signal?
It means investors were willing to pay $30 for every single dollar of earnings a company was making. They were basically pricing in decades of absolutely stellar, almost unrealistic future growth.
And when that hypergrowth didn't materialize?
The multiples collapsed, even though dividends actually grew pretty decently, almost 6% a year on average during that decade. The sheer drop in valuation, the price people were willing to pay for those earnings, it just wiped out all the gains and then some.
How much did it shave off the return?
That change in valuation lopped off a massive 13.5 percentage points from what you might have projected based on dividends alone.
So instead of maybe a 7% annual return, what did investors actually get?
They lost money. On average, stocks lost about 6.5% per year during the 2000s.
Wow. Okay, so that really hammers home the point. For stocks, you absolutely need that long horizon, that 25-year plus view to have a decent shot at riding out these kinds of cycles.
Precisely. Which leads to how you actually build a portfolio for that kind of long-term stability. You need to look beyond just the simple benchmarks.
Like the classic 60-40 portfolio, 60% stocks, 40% bonds. That's what you always hear.
Right, the industry standard.
Yeah.
But it's being challenged now by newer ideas, like risk parity.
Risk parity. Sounds complex. How is it different from the old 60-40? Layman's terms, if possible.
Okay, think of it like this. In a typical 60-40 mix, the stocks, even though they're only 60% of the money, they actually account for something like 90% of the portfolio's overall risk. It's volatility.
Ah, so the risk isn't balanced at all, even if the dollars are.
Exactly. Risk parity tries to fix that. It uses portfolio theory techniques to balance the contribution to volatility from each asset class. So it's not about the dollar amount, it's about how much risk each part adds.
How does that work in practice? More bonds.
Usually, yeah. It often involves using leverage carefully on safer assets like long-term bonds to make their risk contribution sort of equal to the stocks. The idea is this better diversification gives you a potentially smoother ride, a better risk-return trade-off, especially when stocks hit a rough patch like that lost decade.
Interesting. So this all ties into a bigger shift, right? Moving from just earning income to actually securing wealth.
Yes, that's a key distinction in the sources. Building financial wealth is different from just having a job and saving some money.
And for many people aiming for that long-term stability, real estate becomes a big part of the picture. But isn't it, complicated, illiquid, lots of management headaches compared to just buying stocks?
It can be, yes. But it offers some powerful advantages, especially when you factor in the tax code alongside the potential for appreciation.
The dual engine, you called it.
Right. You've got capital gain, which is the property hopefully going up in value over time.
Yeah.
And you've got cash flow from rent generating income.
Okay.
And once you accept that securing wealth often involves holding physical assets long term, you need to optimize them.
Yeah.
And the tax code gives us this amazing tool, depreciation.
Ah, the magic word in real estate.
It really is.
Yeah.
And you need to understand how it works. When you eventually sell an investment property, the IRS calculates your taxable gain as if you took the allowed depreciation every single year you owned it.
Whether you actually claimed it on your taxes or not.
Correct. Whether you claimed it or not.
Hmm.
So the takeaway is it makes absolutely zero sense not to take depreciation every year because it's essentially a phantom loss on paper that reduces your taxable income from the property. Even if your property isn't losing value in the real world, the tax code lets you deduct this wear and tear amount.
And if you don't have enough rental income that year to use the deduction,
You can carry it forward. The loss doesn't just vanish, you can use it to offset income in future years. It's basically the government incentivizing you to hold investment property.
it's like an accounting loss for something that might actually be going up in value. Wild.
It is. And there are other layers too, for people planning to maybe work part-time from home in retirement or manage their investments from there. The home office deduction.
Right, another common one.
Yeah, you can deduct a portion of your common household expenses, mortgage interest, property taxes, cleaning, utilities, maintenance, based on the percentage of your home that's used exclusively for business. Every little bit helps maintain and grow that wealth base.
Okay, so depreciation, home office. Now, moving up the strategy ladder, the sources talk a lot about the 1031 exchange. That sounds like a big one.
It's arguably the most powerful tool for beating wealth in real estate over the long term. It lets you defer paying capital gains taxes when you sell an investment property, if you reinvest the proceeds into another like-kind investment property.
Defer indefinitely.
Potentially, yes. The beauty is the compounding. You sell property A, instead of paying, say, 20–30% tax on your profit, you roll 100% of that equity into buying property B, which is hopefully bigger or better. Then you sell B, roll it into C.
And you don't pay the capital gains tax until you finally sell a property and don't reinvest.
Exactly. You can chain these exchanges together, potentially for your entire investing lifetime, maybe even pass the properties on with a stepped-up basis to heirs. It turns taxable events into non-taxable events along the way, letting your wealth grow much faster.
But it sounds like there are strict rules. You mentioned like kind, and there's a timeline.
Very strict rules. You have to use a qualified intermediary, a third party who holds the funds. You must formally identify potential replacement properties within just 45 days of selling your old one.
Only 45 days? That's tight.
It is. And then you have to actually close on the purchase of one or more of those identified properties within 180 days from the original sale date.
Wow. Okay, that sounds stressful. So what's the catch? When might doing a 1031 not be worth the hassle?
You have to weigh the costs against the benefits. There are fees for the intermediary, extra complexity for your accountant, and, yeah, the stress of those deadlines. If the capital gains tax you owe on the sale is relatively small, say under $50,000, maybe even a bit more depending on your situation, the hassle and costs might just outweigh the tax savings.
So it's a calculation based on how big the tax hit would be.
Right. If you're looking at a six-figure tax bill, the 1031 is almost certainly worth pursuing. If it's much smaller, maybe just pay the tax and keep things simple.
Now, funding these investments, it doesn't have to be just cash savings, right? The sources mention using retirement accounts.
Absolutely. There's a big movement towards using funds from old 401ks or existing IRAs for real estate investing, particularly using Roth IRA funds.
Why Roth specifically?
Because with a Roth, not only does the investment grow tax-deferred, but the qualified withdrawals in retirement, including the rental income and appreciation from the property owned by the Roth, are completely tax-free.
Tax-free income from rental property. That sounds amazing. How do you actually do that? Can you just buy a house with your regular IRA?
Not usually with a standard brokerage IRA. You need what's called a self-directed IRA or a self-directed 401k.
Who's eligible for those?
Pretty much anyone who's eligible for a regular IRA or a Roth IRA can set up a self-directed version. The custodian just has to be one that specializes in holding alternative assets like real estate.
And the advantages?
Flexibility. You can invest in things beyond stocks, bonds, and mutual funds, like physical real estate, private notes, precious metals, etc. And the tax advantages can be huge, especially if you're self-employed.
So for the self-employed,
The sources give an example using a solo 401k, which is for self-employed people or small business owners with no employees other than maybe a spouse. With the solo 401k, the contribution limits are much, much higher than a standard IRA.
higher limits mean more tax savings now.
Exactly. The example suggested a couple could potentially save over $45,000 in current taxes by maximizing solo 401k contributions.
Wow.
And they could contribute maybe $100,000 more into the plan to grow tax-deferred compared to just using IRAs. That larger contribution can then be used by the solo 401k plan itself to buy a rental property.
So the 401k owns the property, not you personally.
Correct. The plan owns the asset. All the rent checks go back into the 401k. All the appreciation stays within the 401k. And it all grows tax-deferred, or potentially tax-free if it's a Roth solo 401k. It's a powerful way to build that financial anchor using pre-tax or tax-free dollars.
Okay, so let's say you've got the financial side shaping up. The next huge piece for long-term stability is the actual place, the physical environment, the neighborhood.
Yeah, where you choose to deploy that wealth, where you choose to live, it matters immensely. And the sources give us this really interesting historical perspective on American communities.
What's unique about how our suburbs develop?
Well, from an international viewpoint, the American suburban model stands out in 4 specific ways.
Okay, what are they?
1, the residents tend to be affluent or middle class, historically. 2, they often live quite far from where they work. 3, homeownership is incredibly high, the norm, really. And 4, the yards. Possessing enormous yards compared to global standards.
The big yard dream. That desire for space definitely shapes our landscape.
It really does. And it's not a new thing. The sources point out that suburbs existed in North America way back, even before the Revolutionary War. Places like Boston, Philadelphia, New York. They had residential areas stretching out along major roads by the 1770s.
But creating those sprawling, low-density communities, that comes at a cost, right? Especially for infrastructure.
A massive cost. And this is critical when you're evaluating a location's long-term resilience. Think about what's needed. Roads, storm sewers, streetlights, curbs, gutters. Miles and miles of it.
Who paid for all that?
Often, it was financed through general taxpayer funds. So even people living in denser, more efficient city areas were effectively subsidizing the expensive infrastructure needed for low-density sprawl.
Yeah.
It creates inherent inefficiencies in providing services.
That's a hidden cost of the suburban model. And the look of these places, the architecture, it wasn't accidental either.
No, the sources note how early American homes were very closely tied to British styles. Georgian was dominant for a long time. Then later, Victorian styles became hugely popular. There was this push to make American homes resemble the cottage homes of England, really emphasizing that country pastoral ideal.
But that ideal, the isolated house with the big yard, does it actually create stable, vibrant communities in the long run?
That's the challenge.
Yeah.
It can actually run counter to what makes a community thrive over decades. The work of Jane Jacobs is really insightful here. She laid out specific criteria for generating what she called exuberant diversity and stability in city districts.
Right, I remember her work. What were her key ingredients for a vital neighborhood?
Four main things. First, a good mix of primary uses, places people live, work, shop, get entertained. Not just seas of houses.
Okay, mixed use. What else?
Second, frequent streets. Small blocks, lots of corners. This knits the area together, encourages walking, mixes people up.
As opposed to
Large borders, things like railroad tracks, big highways, massive single-use complexes like some civic centers. These things divide neighborhoods, they isolate them. Streets connect, borders separate.
Makes sense. Third,
A close mingling of buildings of different ages and conditions, old buildings, new buildings, renovated ones. This allows for a mix of economic levels and enterprise types. Not everything needs to be shiny and new.
and the fourth.
A sufficiently dense concentration of people. You need enough people around for surveillance, eyes on the street, for supporting local businesses, for creating that buzz of activity.
How do these things prevent the kind of isolation or decline you sometimes see in purely residential areas or older suburbs?
It's about continuous activity. Mixed uses mean people are around at different times of day, not just 9 to 5 commuters leaving the place dead in the evening. Frequent streets mean more interaction, more casual encounters. Mixed building ages support different rent levels, attracting a wider range of people and businesses. Density fuels it all.
The sources mention Rockefeller Center as a surprising example of good design despite its scale. Why does that work?
Yeah, it's huge, but Rockefeller Plaza itself functions like an extra street, breaking up those massive blocks. It invites people in, creates connections. If those towers were just lined up along standard long city blocks, Jacobs argued, they'd likely repel pedestrians and feel isolating.
But there's a dark side to success, isn't there? What happens when a neighborhood becomes too popular, too magnetic?
Ah, yes. The risk of self-destruction through success. This is a critical warning for long-term stability. When a place like, say, parts of Greenwich Village becomes incredibly desirable.
Prices skyrocket.
Exactly. Market magnetism takes over. It becomes super profitable to build or renovate exclusively for the wealthiest buyers. Often people without children who can pay the absolute highest price per square foot.
And that pushes out.
It crowds out the families, the artists, the small quirky businesses, the people on moderate incomes. Basically, it kills the very diversity that made the place attractive in the first place. You end up with a monoculture of the rich.
So finding that balance is key. But this question of who gets to live where, it's deeply tangled with some ugly parts of American housing history, isn't it? Segregation, exclusion.
Absolutely inseparable. The sources are blunt about how both institutional policies and private actions deliberately created instability and segregation.
Yeah.
The Federal Housing Administration, FHA, for instance. Their policies could sometimes turn the fear of black families moving in into a self-fulfilling prophecy.
How did that work? Was it just redlining?
Redlining was part of it, but there was also this mechanism exploited by speculators known as blockbusting.
Blockbusting. I've heard the term. What did it involve?
It was a calculated, predatory financial strategy. Speculators would deliberately introduce one or two black families into a previously all-white neighborhood, often renting or selling to them at inflated prices because those families had few other options.
Okay. Then what?
Then, the speculators would fan the flames of racial panic among the white homeowners, often using rumors and fear-mongering. They'd convince white families the neighborhood was declining, turning into a slum, urging them to sell quickly and cheaply before property values collapsed,
So they buy low from panicked white sellers.
and sell high to black buyers who were excluded from other areas. The speculators pocketed the difference, profiting directly from manufactured racial tension and neighborhood instability. It was vicious.
And this wasn't just driven by government policy. Private agreements played a role, too.
A huge role. Private restrictive covenants were written into property deeds for decades, and they were legally enforceable by courts for a long time.
What did these covenants restrict?
Most notoriously, they barred the sale or rental of property to people of African or Mongolian descent, but they got incredibly specific sometimes. The sources mention covenants barring any Negro or native of Ireland.
Ireland. Wow.
Yes, and others targeted various European immigrant groups: Hungarians, Mexicans, Greeks, Italians, Russians, Poles, Slavs, Romanians, depending on the time and place, and who was considered undesirable.
That level of detail just shows how intentional it was, setting up certain communities for exclusion, which inevitably affects their long-term stability and character.
Precisely. And you see echoes of this sorting in the history of zoning laws, too. The original idea in many places was hierarchical, or pyramidal zoning.
Hierarchical, what does that mean?
It ranked land uses. Single-family residential was usually placed at the very top, considered the most delicate or highest use.
Okay.
This meant that in zones designated for single-family homes, only single-family homes were allowed. But in lower-ranked zones, like commercial or industrial, you could often have the uses from the higher ranks plus the business or industrial use.
So you could have apartments above shops in a commercial zone, but you couldn't have a shop in a residential zone.
Generally, yes. This system inherently restricted mixing uses, especially in those delicate residential areas. It structurally reinforced that low-density, uniform suburban ideal. We talked about the very structure Jane Jacobs argued undermines diversity and long-term resilience.
Okay, so let's shift gears. If you've embraced the source's advice, maybe used real estate as that financial anchor for retirement, the work isn't over once you buy. Now comes management.
Right. Whether you manage it yourself or hire a property manager, you're actively managing an asset, and the stakes are high.
And the sources say the absolute most important decision in rental property management is
Choosing the tenant, hands down.
Why is that single decision so critical?
Because one bad tenant,
Right.
just one, can cost you years of financial losses, unbelievable stress, and potentially thousands in property damage or legal fees. It can wipe out any gains you've made.
So how do you protect yourself?
Minimum qualification standards. You need clear, written standards for things like income, credit score, rental history, criminal background. And you have to apply them consistently to every single applicant.
Why the consistency?
2 reasons. First, it helps you pick better tenants objectively. Second, it protects you against claims of discrimination. If you treat everyone the same based on written criteria, it's much harder for someone you reject to claim you did it unfairly. Procedural consistency is your shield.
But the reality on the ground, especially for tenants, it can be really tough, right? The sources paint a stark picture in places like Milwaukee.
They do. It highlights the intense economic pressure many renters face. The majority of poor renting families in Milwaukee were spending over half their income just on housing, some over 70%.
70%. That leaves almost nothing for food, transport, anything else. How does that pressure affect stability?
It leads directly to instability. High eviction rates, for one. Between 2009 and 2011 in Milwaukee, more than 1 in 8 renters went through a forced move.
A forced move, does that always mean a formal court eviction?
No, and that's a critical point. Nearly half of those forced moves were informal evictions.
What's an informal eviction?
It's when landlords bypass the often slow and costly legal eviction process. They might offer the tenant a few $100s cash to just leave, cash for keys, or, in more extreme cases mentioned in the sources, they might do things like remove the front door or shut off utilities to make the place unlivable.
Removing the front door, that's drastic.
It happens. It speaks to the desperation on both sides sometimes, and the constant threat of displacement hanging over tenants, which obviously undermines any sense of neighborhood stability.
Okay, so tenant selection is key. What about rent collection? Any practical tips from the sources?
A couple of things. First, while online payments are convenient, you have to recognize that many tenants, especially lower-income ones, may not have bank accounts, credit cards, or even know how to use a computer comfortably. You need to be prepared to accept rent via cash or money order.
Meet tenants where they are, basically.
Right. And second, late fees. They are absolutely essential. You need to have a clear late fee policy in your lease, and you need to enforce it.
Why so strict on late fees? Seems a bit harsh.
The sources argue it's about training tenants. Rent needs to be their top financial priority each month. If you consistently waive late fees, you send the signal that the rent due date is flexible, that other bills can come first. The fee is the motivator. Waiving it negates its entire purpose.
Okay, shifting from tenants to the building itself. Maintenance. This is huge for long-term value, especially if you plan to sell eventually.
Crucial. And the sources emphasize one key point. Deferred maintenance scares buyers. It doesn't matter if they're first-time buyers or seasoned investors.
Why does it scare everyone?
Experienced buyers know repairs are almost always more expensive and time-consuming than they initially look. First-time buyers are terrified of the unknown cost and liability. Big repair issues create uncertainty, and uncertainty kills deals or drives down prices.
So if you have a known problem, say the roof needs replacing, but you can't afford to fix it before selling.
Honesty is the best policy. You must disclose known major defects. But the smart tactical move, according to the sources, is to get 1 or 2 professional written estimates for the repair cost.
And give those estimates to potential buyers.
Yes, it does 2 things. It shows you're transparent, not trying to hide anything, and it anchors the negotiation. Instead of the buyer imagining some wildly inflated repair cost out of fear, you've provided a realistic number from a pro. It takes away some of their leverage.
Good tip. What about staging the property for sale, making it look good?
Staging is important, inside and out. But the number one rule for exterior staging for curb appeal is psychological.
Which is?
Make the property look easy to maintain. Buyers project themselves into the future. They don't want to buy a weekend chore machine.
So what does easy to maintain look like visually?
Simple things, mostly. Keep sidewalks and paths absolutely clear of litter, weeds, leaves. Prune back any shrubbery that's touching the house or encroaching on walkways. Overgrown plants scream neglect and work.
Anything less obvious?
Yeah, one specific thing mentioned. Icicles. If you're selling in winter, get rid of any icicles hanging from the roof edge.
Why icicles? They look kind of pretty sometimes.
They're a visual red flag. Icicles often indicate poor attic insulation or ventilation, causing snow on the roof to melt and refreeze at the edge. It signals potential problems like ice dams, roof leaks, and high heating bills. It suggests neglect.
Never thought of that. And paint colors.
Stick to neutral. Cream, tan, maybe a soft gray. Avoid anything quirky or highly specific to your taste. You want buyers to imagine their stuff there, not be put off by your bold color choices.
Okay, let's talk actual repairs. Sometimes problems look worse than they are. The sources mention roof leaks. What's often the real culprit?
Surprisingly often, it's not a hole in the roof itself. It's clogged gutters.
Clogged gutters cause leaks inside? How?
Water backs up in the blocked gutter, flows over the back edge, and runs down behind the siding or under the roof shingles at the edge. From inside, it looks just like a roof leak. Cleaning the gutters often solves it.
Good to know. Where do real roof leaks usually happen?
Usually around penetrations where things stick through the roof. Chimneys, vent pipes, skylights. The flashing, the metal seals around these areas can fail over time. That's where most leaks start.
And for bigger, scarier issues, like mold.
Yeah, mold is a big fear trigger for buyers. The advice here is crucial. Get multiple opinions and bids.
Why multiple?
Because some mold remediation companies, the sources warn, use fear tactics. They talk about toxic Black Death mold to justify astronomical prices for what might be a relatively straightforward cleanup.
So don't panic. Get competing quotes.
Exactly. Focus on the actual scope of work removal of affected materials, cleaning, addressing the moisture source, not the scary rhetoric. Compare the labor and materials involved in the different bids.
Now, thinking about the investment side again, is there an advantage to being a professional, large-scale investor versus just a casual landlord?
A massive advantage, especially when buying distressed properties like foreclosures. Scale, systems, and persistence. The sources describe experienced investors having teams that look at literally hundreds of properties every single week. They submit dozens of offers. They know market values inside out.
So it's a numbers game for them.
It is. They can afford to make low offers on many properties, knowing only a small percentage will be accepted, but those deals will be very profitable. They buy at deep discounts because they have the systems and the capital to operate at that scale. The casual investor looking at one or two houses on a weekend just can't compete with that level of activity.
And technology plays a role now too. Prop tech.
Yes, PropTech real estate technology gives sophisticated investors an edge. Tools for finding deals, analyzing values in real time, managing properties efficiently. It levels up the professional game.
But even with all the tech and scale, the human element still matters in deals, right?
Critically important.
Yeah.
The sources are really clear on this. Sellers often give better deals to buyers they personally like and trust.
Even in a purely financial transaction.
Especially, perhaps, when the seller is distressed, facing foreclosure, divorce, illness. These situations are highly emotional. The seller's ego and sense of self-esteem are often on the line.
So coming in with an aggressive lowball offer and a take-it-or-leave-it attitude, probably not the best approach.
Terrible approach in those situations. Tact, respect, building rapport. That can genuinely get you a better price than pure aggression. Treating the seller like a human being, not just an obstacle to a cheap deal, often pays off.
Okay, bringing this all together, finding that long-term stability, that ideal neighborhood, it's really about finding a place where the social contract works, especially when it comes to essential services.
Yeah, and how you access those services, how much they really cost you, is fundamental. In a typical market economy, prices tell you the cost. But when you're dealing with vulnerable populations, maybe the elderly without much money or the uninsured, the currency changes.
What does it change to?
Time. You often pay with your time. The sources give this incredibly vivid example from Milwaukee County's Behavioral Services Division Access Clinic.
What was the situation there?
This clinic serves residents with no insurance or only GAMP. That's the General Assistance Medical Program, basically local aid. There's a sign on the wall for new patients. It warns them. Your first appointment may last 3 to 5 hours.
3 to 5 hours, just for the first appointment.
Yes, that's the cost. If you don't have the money for private care or better insurance, you pay with a huge chunk of your day just to get in the door. That kind of inefficiency dramatically impacts the quality of life and stability for people in that community.
It really highlights a fundamental challenge, doesn't it?
It does. In a market system, prices force decision makers to confront costs. In a planned system, or a heavily subsidized one like parts of healthcare, the planners, the public health officials, the administrators have to somehow figure out the true costs and benefits of their decisions.
Which is hard to do.
It's a massive task. And the sources suggest it's often avoided, perhaps replaced with rhetoric or budget numbers that don't fully capture the real cost, especially the time cost imposed on users. The actual efficiency of your local services is a critical, often hidden factor in choosing a stable, long-term neighborhood.
And on the financial side, there's another subtle drain on stability, especially for people on fixed incomes, like many retirees. It's called bracket creep.
Ah, yes. The nasty interaction between inflation and progressive income taxes.
How does bracket creep work?
Tax brackets, the income levels at which tax rates change, are usually set in fixed dollar amounts. Inflation causes wages and incomes to rise in dollar terms just to keep pace with the rising cost of living.
So your purchasing power might not actually increase.
Exactly, your real income stays the same. But because your dollar income went up, you might get pushed into a higher tax bracket.
Meaning you pay a higher percentage of your income in taxes.
Even though you're not actually any better off in real terms, you end up paying a higher percentage of your real income to the government simply because of inflation. It's a quiet but constant erosion of financial stability for people on fixed or slowly rising incomes.
Okay, as we wrap up this deep dive, we need to address some complex policy debates that came up in the sources. These relate directly to community vulnerability and public health responses, which obviously impact stability. We need to present these perspectives neutrally.
Right. One source offered a very critical view of the policy responses during the recent pandemic. It argued these responses fundamentally changed the social contract in ways it saw as harmful to long-term stability.
What was the core argument?
The viewpoint presented was that, allegedly for the first time in history, healthy people were instructed to isolate alongside the sick. This was done, the source claims, in the name of protecting the vulnerable, particularly the elderly.
And the source disagreed with that approach.
Yes. The claim made in this source was that these centralized actions and mandated isolation would, counterintuitively, end up killing the elderly by the tens of thousands, not directly from the virus, but from consequences like loneliness, disrupted care, economic hardship, and general societal breakdown.
That's a strong claim. Did the source attribute blame?
The source asserted that certain organizations dictated the narrative and the response strategies, and that this narrative was strongly supported by major internet platforms and mainstream media, while, it claims, opposing scientific or critical voices were censored by those same platforms.
How does this connect back to community planning and long-term stability?
The source specifically raised concerns about the impact of mandated interventions on younger generations, the future residents and leaders of these communities. It cited a study from Germany involving 25,000 schoolchildren.
What did that study supposedly find?
According to the source's description, parents submitted over 17,000 health complaints related to mandated mask use. The researchers involved reportedly concluded that mask mandates harm children physically, psychologically, and behaviorally.
Were there specifics on the types of harm reported?
Yes. The source stated the study linked mandated mask use to 24 distinct health complaints. These reportedly ranged from things like fatigue, irritability, and headaches, to difficulty concentrating and rapid exhaustion during normal activities.
Okay, so just to be crystal clear for our listeners, we're reporting these specific claims and viewpoints as they were presented in one of the sources provided for this deep dive. We're not endorsing them, but presenting them as part of the complex landscape of policy debates affecting community life and stability.
Exactly. It underscores how contentious these issues are and how planning for long-term stability requires navigating deeply uncertain social and political environments.
So let's try to synthesize everything we've covered. Finding that successful, long-term spot, that ideal neighborhood for stability, it seems to boil down to a few key integrated factors.
I think so. First, you've got to build that financial anchor. That means understanding investments, like the real risks and rewards of stocks versus bonds, and leveraging real estate tax strategies, depreciation, the 1031 exchange. Smart financial groundwork.
Right. Second.
Second, you have to really analyze the place itself. Understand its socio-geographic structure. Are you choosing a place with the kind of mixed uses, walkable streets, and diversity Jane Jacobs talked about? Or are you opting for low-density sprawl or an area with a history of instability or exclusion?
And the third piece.
Third, you need to be ruthlessly realistic about accessing vital services. What's the true cost in both money and time, especially for healthcare? And you have to factor in those background economic pressures like bracket creep constantly nibbling away at fixed incomes.
The sources also mention something called a habit scorecard. How does that fit in?
It's a really interesting concept for tying it all together. The idea is that real lasting change or success doesn't come from huge dramatic actions, but from the small habits you track and review consistently. Like, the source suggested, looking at yourself in the mirror, but from a conversational distance, close enough to see important details, but far enough back to keep the bigger picture in view. Applying that to your finances, your property management, your community engagement.
Okay, let's really unpack this final thought then. We often think of retirement or just settling down long term as stepping away from the daily grind, stepping away from active management.
The reward for years of work, right?
Exactly. But everything we've discussed today, drawn from these sources, seems to point in the opposite direction. The most stable, successful long-term outcomes seem to demand continued intentional commitment to management.
Management of your investments, constantly adjusting to market realities and tax laws,
Management of your physical assets, dealing with tenants, maintenance, staging.
and even management of your own habits and engagement with the community and its services.
It seems stability isn't a destination you arrive at, but something you have to actively earn and re-earn year after year. You have to stay vigilant against financial volatility, social changes, economic headwinds like inflation and taxes.
It requires ongoing effort.
So the final question for you, the listener, is this. Given that stability requires this continuous management, what specific management-focused habits are you implementing today? What systems are you putting in place right now to ensure that the neighborhood you choose, the life you build, remains financially and physically resilient, not just next year, but 20 or 30 years down the road? Thinking about that commitment, that seems to be the real starting line.